Thanks to our Patreon members for helping to make this episode possible, and we're now available on all the major podcasting platforms. You can find more information at the links below. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a special edition on an introduction to Hinduism for people from the Judeo-Christian tradition. So I've been studying Hinduism, interested in Hinduism for decades, and have worked with North Indian classical musicians, which was a great pleasure, and reading the texts. And how do you come to grips to Hinduism? And basically, I decided I don't want to say, here's an introduction to Hinduism, because there's so many great Hindu scholars who are very much more capable of doing it than I am. But I do think I have some perspective on why it's hard for us to figure out Hinduism when we come from the Islamic Judeo-Christian ethic and how it makes it hard to figure out exactly what's going on. So rather than saying this is how to understand Hinduism, I think this is an introduction on why we struggle to understand Hinduism coming from the Judeo-Christian ethic or the Islamic ethic, as opposed to this tradition of very old, large tradition that informs Hinduism. So it's sort of a origins of our confusion, and hopefully that adds a certain amount of clarity, but I guess we'll just have to see. So the first thing to note is Islam, Judaism, and Christianity all share the notion of a book, right? We have these sacred texts, the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran, of course, and in most highly developed in Islam, of course, the Quran is the great source of the sacred, of the holy, of knowledge, of wisdom. It's all there. So the Quran is just absolutely central to Islam. And so we're used to thinking in terms of a book. Like this is, sometimes these are called the people of the book, right? When you have the three great religions there. Hinduism does not have this. It's not that they don't have a book. It's that they have so many books that it's hard to figure out what do you do when there's so many books, right? And we'll talk about why this is important to Hinduism and why this gives it a very different cast. But just so you get a sense of this, you have, what are the main, people go, oh, well, what are the main texts? It's like, well, there you go. So you have the origins of Hinduism, and at the deepest levels are probably the Vedas, the Rig Vedas, some of the oldest, they're actually some of the oldest texts in the world, as well as the oldest textual basis of Hinduism. And then you have the Upanishads, which are a little later, but also important, more legalistic, more sort of codified, certainly than the Vedas. And then you have the things like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, which are the two great epics that will be constantly referred to in any time you encounter Hinduism. And then you have, the sutras, you have the histories of mythology of the Hindu tradition. But if we just go back, let's just take the Mahabharata, the Upanishads, and the Vedas, just your these three basic texts. You're looking at about 10,000 pages of material, give or take, something like that. So, and that's just a small corner of the textual foundation of Hinduism. And so it is, it's a lot. It's a lot of material. And at some point it becomes so much material that it's just not that helpful when you're coming from the Western mindset or the Judeo-Christian ethic mindset of going, hey, here's a pretty finite source, and just go with that. So for instance, in Islam, there's a tradition of memorizing the Quran. But you can't really memorize an infinite amount of textuality, right? Like this is not, so it's like, you can't like imbibe that in, the people do memorize long sections of the great poems and the Vedas and all this, but the notion of memorizing all of the text of Hinduism would make no sense. Like it's not humanly doable, and B, they don't even really agree on what all those texts would be in any case and which are most important. And so it's not that Hinduism isn't literate, because it's sort of super literate. It's like it's not a little bit of civilization; it's all of civilization, right? It's so much literature. There's so many books that it kind of goes the other direction and becomes unhelpful in some ways. Particularly when you're looking at it from our perspective of going, oh well, what are the really important passages? What are the really important books? And it's like, well, yeah, no, you can't do that. Like this is not. You're already. That desire, that goal to narrow it down and really pin it down and get a few, get the 10 commandments, right? So your mind has already gone wrong. And so when we're faced with this just, infinite variety and richness, our desire, I think natural from this tradition is to say, well, some of this must really be core and the rest of it must just be fluff. But in Hinduism, that's you again. You've already gone wrong when you start thinking in these terms. And I've had these conversations with people, and I've felt this frustration myself, and I've had to sit with that and go, "Oh, right." So part of the problem is we want to sort the world by the things that really matter and by the things that are extraneous and don't really matter, which, as we'll see very soon, in Hinduism is you're already off to a bad start. So, but that's problem number one. If you start doing this, is you start looking for the key text, the key ideas, which makes sense, right? I'm not saying that's insane, but when it just doesn't function the way you want it to, because we want to have, a few key passages and then we're good to go, right? Like kind of quick and dirty, get me in, get me out. Like this is not how Hinduism works. Not only that, but it's not even clear that the literary history, of which there is so much, is really the core. It can be core, but it depends. You'll see. We'll see why this may or may not even be important, because the oral tradition, oh my gosh, now we're talking, right? Like it's really the oral personal connections that resonate. So yeah, so despite having like this fabulous wealth of literary tradition, they also have this tradition of like, man, and probably who, maybe are not that important. So yeah, we'll see how this functions a bit. So you have your basic concepts, of which there are some, right? So we can put our fingers around this. And the first one, and I think just basically everybody talks about Hinduism, will talk about this, I would assume. I can't find any exceptions, but there may be out there, is the notion of the Brahman. And this is, again, we have this problem already. This is where it's different from the Judeo-Christian ethic and, Protestantism or Catholicism, is this notion of it's just the all-pervading force. It could be life force. It could be the fact that anything exists rather than nothing. Like one of the great philosophical questions: why does anything exist rather than nothing? You can call that Brahman, but it's the life. It's the animating force of the universe, if you will, and that pervades everything, and it is before is such a crazy word to use. It's the gods are an expression of Brahman. They are not Brahman. Well, they are and not. They both are and are not Brahman, but they don't make it. They don't predate it. They don't create it. They are an outcome of it, an expression of it, not the other way around. And so for us, in the Judeo-Christian ethic and Islamic ethic, although in Islam, maybe the Quran comes first, but God is there, Allah is there, Jesus is there, God is there. Everything. The God makes things go. It's the source. It's the power. It's the God. The thing you worship is the thing that makes the universe go round and round. In Hinduism, no. And the Brahman is not interested in you. So you don't appeal to the Brahman, right? You don't make, it just doesn't make sense. Like it's not disinterested in you, but it's also not, you don't have a personal relationship with the Brahman, right? It's like having a personal relationship with gravity. You do have a personal relationship with the gravity, but it's not like a reciprocal feed. You don't ask the gravity for things because it's not going to respond that way. The Brahma is not a human. It's not a big scary human. It just doesn't have any. It's not personifiable in that sense. So yeah, Brahma doesn't work that way, and so you're not in this direct relationship with another being. You're in this direct relationship with a universal force, as it were. So we already struggle with that because, we say, God is central, God is everything, God is the first, the last. And, can God make something so heavy you can't lift it? These kinds of questions come up. And they make limited sense in Hinduism because you're like, well, maybe, but that's not really all that important because we don't think about the gods aren't that way. It's also one of the reasons you can have so many gods. You can have all the gods, right? Hinduism has all the gods because the gods are simply expressions of another thing, and that thing is universal and all encompassing. And so, if your particular god is great, then yeah, good for you. Knock yourself out. We'll go with that one. But it's not an investment per se in particular gods, although, of course, they do worship particular gods, but as an expression of a greater power. And then a flip side of that, and related to this, is the Atman, which is the Brahman in you, give or take. I mean, this is kind of the idea. And the classic example, which you'll encounter virtually everywhere, and by the way, you see this in the visual imagery of Hinduism, you see this in the literature of Hinduism, you'll see it in book illustrations, carvings, it's all over, which is, if you see a big tree with leaves, this is the Brahman and the Atman. The universe is the tree, you are the leaf. And so the Brahman is everywhere and in everything. And so you're just like a leaf of a tree. So a leaf is not the tree, but it is part of the tree. So that part that's in you is the Atman. So your Atman is just a little spark of the Brahman that is in everything in the universe. And so you are a leaf on a tree, which just means you're part of the universe, which is, it's in some way, there's nothing even question, right? Like, yeah, obviously we're part of the universe and hence we're all connected to the universe. And so what the problem is we tend to think that there's this separation, there's this distance, that we are a different thing. So we don't think we're God. And in the Hindu tradition, they don't think they're God either, but they think, like the gods, they're all connected to this Brahman thing, which basically makes you functionally just like the gods, right? Like, so you have it's a much blurrier line because everybody has this shared animating for everybody and everything has this shared animating force that is you're both separate from and a part of, like a leaf on a tree. We don't look at a leaf and go, this is a tree. But we do look at a leaf and go, well, this is part of a tree. And they go together. They're expressions of each other. It's a reciprocal relationship again. And so you need to understand anything about Hinduism is to note this very great joining, like this not separateness. And so much, particularly in the Christian tradition, is God is over there and you're over here and there's this big gap and you're trying to do things to fill that gap so that this God will bless you and make, good things happen for you either in this world or generally in heaven in the next world. And so then that'll make everything right. This is completely, it's not that there aren't the elements of this concept in Hinduism a little bit with the gods and prayers and sacrifices and all that, but a very, very different outlook, totally different sort of take on this because it is this notion of, oh, no, you're just part of the Brahma. You're a leaf on the tree, right? You don't do leaves pray to trees? No, they just are. They're just together, right? There's no big, in some ways, it's no big deal. You just are. You can't even do anything about it. It's not like a leaf can untree itself. Like it's not a possibility. So you can't help but do this. And so that fundamental notion that we're all kind of sacred and holy all the time, and pretty much everything is, just like doesn't work. And we'll see this when we talk about karma. So again, you got your Brahman, which throws us off because it's not a god. You don't relate to it in the way you would a god. And the Atman, which is the Brahman in you, which is also challenging because it means you're sacred in the way the gods are sacred because you have this shared force. It doesn't make you a god, but it makes you have this core capacity for sacredness. And then we have this idea of yoga, which we kind of get this wrong in every way, but yoga is simply, well, it comes from, it's great, it comes from the root in Hinduism, or not Hinduism, the root in Sanskrit for yoking things together like an ox and a cart, right? So what are you yoking together? You're yoking your Atman and your Brahman together. It's the practice that you do that allows you to recognize that your Atman and your Brahman are together. And this practice can be anything. There are no, you can do anything, which is why, back to what I was talking about with so many books, so much literature, one of the practices that allows you to do this is studying. And writing and studying and learning is one of the paths that allows you to yoke this together. And so the studying, creation, recitation, commentating on the classics and the creation of the classics themselves is a practice of yoking, is a yoga, is a practice, is a way of yoking together your mind and spirit so that it joins with the Atman and the Brahman, and so you overcome this illusion of separateness and division. And that, of course, will lead to this proliferation of texts, not because the texts themselves are important, although they are important, but in many ways because the creation, meditation, reflection, and reading of the texts, this is what's vitally important. You get some of this, by the way, in Islam. Some of medieval Christianity had some of this, that just the recitation of biblical passages was the point of the biblical passage, right? Not the content, the recitation. It's meditating on the Quran is itself a holy practice, right? It is itself a path to sacredness. And in Hinduism, this is absolutely, but by the way, so is everything else. Dance, music, sex, meditation, exercise. And that's when we talk about yoga, we think of course, people doing poses and breathing exercises and so on. That is absolutely part of the tradition, but yoga just means everything that you can do or anything you can do that brings the Brahman and Atman into harmony, your awareness of their harmony. You don't really bring them into harmony, they can't help it. So you become aware of their harmony. And that feeling, that sensibility that you get is the proof of it. And this is another thing we struggle with. So just as an example here, again, I work with North Indian classical musicians, and one of the singers, Srivani Jade, it was after COVID the COVID restrictions were being lifted. And so she hadn't performed live for, 18 months or 2 years, a long time. And so she was just very ready to be with an audience again. And so we did a concert where I did some speaking about the musical tradition in the East and the West and that. And then she did this performance, and I mean, it was awe-inspiring. And the audience was 95%, Indians, native Indians from the subcontinent. And it was just, the light was on. It was unbelievably powerful. And so you just had that transportive feeling that music can impart, right? That sense of just timelessness and wholeness and unity and, emotional uplift, everything. It was all there very powerfully. She delivered it. Even the other musicians, and she had one of her students on stage with her singing a little bit of duets and sections. You could see them looking at her in amazement at times. And at the end of it, the audience lined up to touch her feet. And be blessed by her, because you're right. And so much of what we mistake in Hinduism and trying to bring it from the Western tradition is in this moment for me, is where you go, one, the music is itself a sacred practice. Two, the sacred is felt. Like when you have that experience, like if you name that feeling that I think most people get with music at some point, not all music all the time, but some music some of the time, if you call that, not God, but the sacred, the holy, the Brahman, like that, and the fact that I have that feeling means I am in the Brahman, right? I am, my Atman and my Brahman are now unified. Then you go, oh, music can do that. Ipso facto, music is potentially sacred. And ipso facto, the person who produces that is themselves sacred and worthy of reverence, as she was, certainly, no doubt about it. And so, you want her blessing. You want to touch her feet. You want to feel that sense of respect and reverence for somebody who was able to create that moment. And so, but it's not, it can be dance, it can be music, it can be poetry, it can be, literature, meditation, breathing exercise is very big. Talk a little bit about breathing in a moment. All of these forces, all these actions, all these movements are possible to generate and express the yoking, the marrying of these kinds of elements together so that you have that sensibility. And so because of this, because there's so many practices that allow you to experience this directly, it's not a faith-based religion. There's no faith in Hinduism. You don't need to have faith, because the idea that you would hear Srivani or Ustad Ali Akbar Khan or one of these other musicians where you'd see a recitation of passages of the Mahabharata, or you'd see amazing dancers, or you would read an uplifting passage and not feel anything, would suggest that you're kind of sick. But when you do feel something, then you go, oh, well, there you go, right? There's no faith involved, right? Well, you don't need faith to have these extraordinary experiences. You just need a yoga. You need a practice that brings you to them. And in the yoga that we think about, like the physical yoga of stretches and poses, if you talk to people, they're like, oh, well, it makes me feel healthy. It makes me feel vibrant. It relaxes my mind. This is calming or whatever. And you go, right. So it's not faith, right? You're not feeling, you don't need to say, well, I don't have any evidence, or, Jesus is going to come back someday. No, they're right now, today, do a practice and they'll be there. It'll be present. It'll be with you, right? It's not, so that divide is just gone. Like the divide that is felt is considered to be the problem, right? You always want to erase that. So it's, again, another problem with this, because there's so many ways to access it, and the feeling that you get is so clearly articulated and so strongly felt that Hinduism doesn't understand what is faith, right? Like what is all this faith nonsense you're talking about? It doesn't know. It just doesn't. It's faith. It's just a very, very weak concept in Hinduism, because it just suggests that you're kind of sick. And then so, Brahman, Atman, yoga yokes them together, and then karma, which is the big concept that we hear all the time related to Hinduism, is the roots here is kar, which is like to do. Actually, it's a shared root, sort of a related root in French to faire, which is to do, to make, sometimes to play, to participate. Right, it's a verb that's used for everything. It's a very more like, we have several verbs in English that do this, but car is the same kind of verb as the root to faire in French, which is just, it's to do, and then the ending ma is just makes it a noun, basically the outcome of the thing that was done. And so we think of karma as this judgment, or there's some power, and you get good karma or bad karma, or I want to avoid things that cause me bad karma because it's sort of a payback or something like this. And I think that's it's okay, but it's really the outcome of the doing is the karma, basically. The verb is the karma. The outcome of the verb is just what happens, right? So if you do something that upsets a lot of people, you've upset a lot of people, which makes you feel bad. It's in a way, it almost has this Epicurean feel to me when I think about, other philosophical examples, because Epicurus said there's no rules about doing anything. Like you can do anything. You can kill your neighbor's children. Like there's no morals, there's no ethical principles. Just do whatever you want, but don't do things that make you sick. Don't do things that make you feel bad, because it's stupid to do things that make you feel bad. So if you eat until you're sick, that's karma, right? It's not the karma is that you ate until you were sick. Like that's not bad. You made yourself sick. That's dumb. Don't be dumb, right? This is like, if you do things that make you feel good, well, that's good karma. If you do things that make you feel bad, well, that's bad karma. But it's not really bad karma. It's just the outcome of the thing that you did in the doing of it is there. And then people say, oh, well, this is about discipline, and this is this is that Judeo-Christian ethic of suffering and pain and, disciplining the body. And it's like, no, if you discipline your body in a way that causes you pain, that's also stupid, right? This is not a good outcome. This is just stupid. And so don't do that, right? Don't do things that cause you to be unhappy. Don't do things that create problems for yourself. Don't do things that cause you pain, because the feedback is you're unhappy, you're sick, whatever, you feel pain, you're stressed out, whatever it is. It's like it's not mystical. It's not like, oh, and in some ways the Christian tradition, the Judeo, particularly Protestant tradition, which is suffering is good, and struggle is good, and pain is good, because at some point you'll be rewarded for that. Yeah, just cancel all that out, because and karma is just like, well, no, if it's painful, that's that's probably something is wrong somewhere. Right? Like to be healthy is to be healthy. Like let's try and be healthy. Now, how you be healthy, this is of course going to fill many tens of thousands of pages of Hindu texts and trying to figure this out. So it's not like this is an answer to all things, but karma is not like some sort of external judgment that rebounds back on you. This is because we, people of the book, you have a bunch of rules, you have laws, and you have a judging God out there. Yeah, there is no judging God. That doesn't exist. And so karma is the cycle of, of what your actions do. They come back and they have impacts. And if they have good impacts, then, well, okay, that's probably good. And if they have bad impacts, that's probably bad. And then trying to figure out how to act in ways so that they have positive versus negative impacts, this is a big part of it. But the notion that there is some third party out there judging, in fact, this is one of the great passages from Mahabharata, from the Bhagavad Gita, is at some point Arjuna is like saying, okay, basically, so tell me what's right and wrong. Like, explain to me why this is right and this is wrong. And, come on now, give me some ethical principles. And Rama he just exposes himself and says, that's not something that's available to you. So stop. Like, stop that. Don't. This is not a thing that you get to think about. Like, it's not available to humans because you just can't. So just do what is in the nature of yourself to do, and then you're doing good, because that's basically all that there is possible to know about what's good and evil. Like it's really almost not a functional category in so many ways in Hinduism. Not again in the way. So we struggle with this because we want. That we want good and we want evil and we want right and we want wrong and we want, the sinners to be punished, and in the future the good people are going to be rewarded, and then we all go to heaven, which is this great place that's someplace else and very much unlike the earth. And this is just, again, if you read parables and sections from the Mahabharata, you'll realize very quickly that, these rules do not apply. And so when you add up these just four very simple, very basic, we could talk about Dharma, there's a lot of other ones we could talk about, but if we just think about these core four concepts and four words that you're probably familiar with, except for maybe Atman and Brahman, but I do think they've made it out generally into the public, it has a lot of knock-on effects that confuse us. One is the world in Hinduism is not an illusion. It's not bad. it's not neither an illusion nor is it bad. And so we're often like, oh, the real world is coming. This is just a fallen, poisoned world, and it's going to be redeemed by Jesus, and then the real world is going to come. That's the world you should focus on. Buddhism, which is sort of an offshoot reabsorbed into Hinduism in a lot of ways, said for a while, like, no, the world is just an illusion. Let go of that. But this is not really a Hindu concept. And Buddhism is, I would say you could argue, but I would say generally has let go of that argument as has been reabsorbed into Hinduism. And this notion of saying, no, the world is just the world. And what the confusion is when we see things in the world as being separate. That's where we get confused. When we don't see the world all as a one thing, as a piece, as all together in a whole that unified, that includes me, because it's all embraced in the big Brahman, right? We're all leaves on the tree of Brahma. And so what confuses us is not that the world is fake or unreal or fallen or poisoned or bad. It's that we don't see that it's all of a piece. We're confused, and that we are part of it, that when we see ourselves as separate. So we see ourselves as separate from God. Okay, mistake number one. We see ourselves as separate from the world. Mistake number two. And it's even built into the language. Like, it's fascinating. If you study Sanskrit, there are prepositions in Sanskrit that are just untranslatable, I would say. I mean, they were like enmeshed. They have a lot of prepositions for being within, enmeshed, in sort of like, where is the butter in a cake? Like, if you make a cake, where does the butter go? It's in there someplace, but we say it's in the cake, which is sort of the only preposition we have. But we have, like, in Sanskrit, you have much better prepositions for this sorts of like mixed and yet still butter. Right? It's in the cake, but is it still butter? And we're kind of like, no, it's kind of become something else. And it's true, but it's also still butter. But yeah, so we struggle with this because we don't have good prepositions for things that are both mixed and separate at the same time. And that notion is really core, because if we're all part of the big encompassing Brahman, then everything is part of the big encompassing Brahman. And we're only confused when we don't see this. So also very weak on good and evil. So the world is not an illusion. Also, the world is not good or evil, because just good and evil aren't very strong impulses. You don't, I would say the stronger impulse is healthy and unhealthy, right? Like, this seems to be the stronger sensibility. Is it health giving or is it health removing? And you can say that's good and evil, but it's not, because there's no hell to go to, and there's no salvation to achieve. And so, yeah, what do you, so you don't have that kind of judgment going on. Not that, Hinduism is happy to judge all kinds of things, but not in those terms of absolutes. And that different people, what's good for somebody is not good for somebody else. Again, this is why there's so many yogas. Like, maybe even an infinite possible number of yogas. Like, there is an infinite possible. What's the best God to worship? Well, the one that's best for you. Worship the one that's good for you. In fact, you'll see this in some texts and some videos and things. If you look at, what is Hinduism, and you'd say, if you're a Christian and you said, oh, I want to, become a Hindu, I want to convert or something, even though Hinduism doesn't proselytize. If you did for some reason say, oh, I want to convert to Hinduism, they'd be like, well, you have a perfectly good God, don't you? Like, aren't you good? Aren't you good? Like, that seems good. It seems like you have a good God. Like, why not just roll with that one? which is very, like, it's only the Hindus say that. Like, Christians don't say this. Islam does not say this. Islam doesn't say, oh no, all the gods are equally great. Like, we've got Allah, you got your God. They're basically, it's all the expression of the same notion. And this is not, the people of the book don't say this. The people of the book say, no, we've got the right God, and your gods are false gods, and convert or die. This is the great tradition. Basically all of the tradition of these religious wars that were fought, Reformation, in sort of civil war within Christianity, the battles with Islam, just for time, and for several thousand years now we've been doing this, and you go, oh, Inquisition, hello, you not only have to have the Christianity, you have the right kind of Christianity, and you can't be a crypto Jew, and the Jews were murdering the Christians, and it just goes on and on. And it's like, or you could just go, meh, it's all good. Like, you just don't. But again, then you go wrong is when you try to force other people, like, hey, well, now this isn't nice. This is definitely bad karma. Like trying to threaten other people or force them to do things or being violent about all this. Like this is not helpful in any way. Also, so the world's not an illusion. Good and evil is like turned down by like 95%. Faith, like again, as I mentioned, like faith doesn't, how, I mean, what are you going to say? You have faith that music exists? You have faith that music makes you feel a way? It's not really faith. It's like, no, that's your feeling. And that feeling is, there you go. You've harnessed, you've yoked your Atman and your Brahma for a moment, and that's hugely valuable and very sacred. And so there you go. You're good to go. Why is this confusing? And the emphasis on holy people again is like there is this huge emphasis on it in Hinduism, but it's also quite different because they're like professionals. One way to think of it, I don't know if professional is the right way. It's if you decide to meditate a lot, if you decide to be a holy man and you're gonna take a vow of chastity and not eat and you're gonna just sit outside in the rain, people go, oh wow, like your yoga is pretty. That's a pretty extreme, aggressive, sort of professional level yoga, which we recognize as a holy person. Like, okay, yeah, this is someone who's really trying to go for it, but also it's also just sort of like, yeah, that's one way to do it of many thousands. Like this isn't the rightest way, right? This isn't the way that most completely. So it is both an emphasis on and a de-emphasis, right? It doesn't make you this category apart. It makes you somebody who's chosen a rarer path, maybe one way to think of it. But there are so many paths and there's so many good ways to go that it's not a like, oh, we're like a lot in Christian tradition in particular, there's a lot of shaming, right? Like the point of some of these saints and some of these monks is to shame you and that you're living an awful life. That is not the point of a holy man in Hinduism. It's not shaming people, right? That's not the goal, not what's being emphasized here. And so it's also hard for us to understand, like, well, who are these people? And finally, just another one example of this is the pilgrimage. Popularity of pilgrimages in India is just astounding. And I mean, it's hard to get a good number on this, but it's easy, just conservatively 150-ish million minimum to 200 million to more people in India a year go on pilgrimages of some kind, but usually of multiple days and sometimes weeks, sometimes months. And you go, wow, like, what is this about? And it's like, oh, I've again to conceptualize from the outside. Maybe it's completely different on the inside, but from the outside, the way I've tried to work this out is it's like a Brahman vacation, right? It's like the pilgrimage is a yoga, right? Like, oh, I'm confused about things. My life is disorderly. I've got all these input. I'm just going to go on a pilgrimage because it's focused, it's organized, and the process of doing this harmonizes my Brahma, my Atman, and this brings me a sense of well-being and the process of pilgrimaging. And so again, it's not a box that you check, right? It's not a thing that's done so that it's another thing off the list that makes you a good Hindu. It's a thing that you do because it makes you because it's a yoga that sort of yokes these things together. And so again, we have this, again, we struggle with how to even articulate this because it's such a different, like you go to church every Sunday because that makes you a good person. That's the function there. And if you don't go, you're a sinner. And then, a few generations ago, you could actually be penalized. You could be jailed for not going. So, definitely it is something you do so that God doesn't smite you or God smiles on you. You're trying to curry favor or something. But when there's limited sense of good and evil, when there's no God to appeal to directly in that sense, or there's 1,000 gods to appeal to, pick the one that you like the best, or the couple that you like the best. It just, the relationship changes. And so the notion of a pilgrimage, which is in the West is often, in the Judeo-Christian ethic, is also often explicate sin, right? Like this was part of it, or to earn rewards in the eyes of God, quite literally. So if you were a criminal, you would be branded, or you'd get a special shirts or locks or things that would say, oh, you have to do a pilgrimage to the east or do these kind, and then when you're done, we'll forgive you of your sin. So it was literally this like contract that you had worked out with God and or the religious authorities to forgive you so you would not suffer an eternal life. Yeah, this is just, the emphasis is just completely different. It's like, again, it's like a Brahma vacation. It's a sense of the process is the goal. Again, like the yoga, the practice is the thing there is no good outcome from the practice. The practice is the good outcome, as it were. And so, so we struggle. So all of these things give us, at each step, like we're prone to confuse and misunderstand what the elements that are being emphasized and the sensitivity and sensibility that underlines all of this. And so there's very little, and it just exit. There's also, and traditionally, although Hinduism, modern Hinduism, has actually sort of acquired some things like sexual mores and sort of ethical like concerns with good and evil a little bit, but this almost seems entirely imported from Islam and with encounters with the West, with Christianity and Islam, and like that very strong puritanical force that both or all three of the religions has influenced Hinduism. But more of its core and more of its day-to-day expression just, it just doesn't have this. And so here's a religion, philosophical system, way of living that either has no book or all the books, lots of gods or no gods, right? And so we get the feel of all of this comes across quite incorrectly, and we miss a lot. And the last example I'll give is, I've talked to many people, this one always kills me, is who do yoga and they get injured. And I'm like, if you injure yourself doing yoga, like this is the great Western mistake on yoga, right? Because it's antithetical to the whole concept, right? Like you've gone wrong, because it's not injury that you're supposed to be seeking, but not injury, de-injuring. Yoga is about overcoming the types of things that would injure you in theory. But it is that like, I was really pressing myself. I was really like all these, we want to get better at Brahman, right? All that striving and achieving, and you can't get better at it. You can't, you don't, your Atman doesn't get bigger. It doesn't get shinier. It doesn't improve. It just is, right? It's the isness of things. And so it's the embracing of the isness that throws us off. And you don't change it. You don't transform it. It doesn't, all of those kinds of things that we talk about and are really, really innate within the Judeo-Christian tradition go away, and to or at least they're de-emphasized to a phenomenal degree. So, anyway, just a few thoughts there on why it's difficult to really get a sense of Hinduism when you don't come from that tradition, and or when you come from a tradition that whose the sets of emphases and the ideas and outlooks are so fundamentally, like really at a core level, so different from those that inform the Hindu tradition. So a non-introduction to Hinduism for people from the Judeo-Christian ethic. Thank you very much.